So last week, we started this series on judgment. And we talked about the destruction of judging people. We talked about how much fun it is to notice other people's faults. We talked about how it makes us feel superior, how it makes us feel self-righteous. We also looked at how destructive it can be. But we also talked about how destructive it can be when we make a decision to look the other way, to see something in somebody's life that's causing them obvious damage and potentially even greater damage. To see them heading down a road that's destined for destruction, and then to sit back and say absolutely nothing. Like sometimes to avoid judgment, to say nothing, to do nothing, like to see an obvious problem in somebody's life, and then sit back and say, well, it's not my place to judge. It's not my issue. To not reach out, to do nothing is actually not the right thing. It's the easy thing. It's the selfish thing. But it's often not the right thing. And so this morning, we're gonna look a little bit at what Jesus said about intervention, about stepping up to confront each other from time to time. And we're going to start with Matthew chapter 18, verses 12 to 13. And here's what Jesus said. He said, "What do you think? If a man owns 100 sheep and one of them wanders away, will he not leave the 99 on the hills and go and look for the one that wandered off? And if he finds it, truly I tell you, he is happier about that one sheep than about the 99 that did not wander off." Now, I mean, you think about this. Isn't it kind of interesting how when you lose something of value, that you're so focused on the one thing that you don't have that you take no joy in the things that you do have. Like when you lose something, there's really no consolation in the fact that you haven't lost other things. Like if you can't find your keys, you don't stop looking and go, well, at least I still have my car. Okay, if you lose the remote, oh my goodness, if you lose the remote, you don't stop looking and go, well, at least we still have a TV. Okay, if you lose your dog, you don't not look for it and sit back and go, well, at least we got a hamster. Okay, in the same way, Jesus says, okay, well, isn't it interesting that the shepherd, even though he has 100 sheep and he's only missing one, doesn't sit around going, well, at least I still have the 99. Now, Jesus is speaking to a particular audience here, and prior to this, Jesus has just talked about the attitude of children, how children have this very humble trust in adults, and how we need to have that similar childlike attitude with God. And he's talked about how important it is to not lead children down a path of destruction. And so Jesus says, okay, just like a shepherd wouldn't settle for having the 99, like he would do everything possible to track down the one sheep that wandered off. In the same way, your heavenly Father would not want any of these little ones, and he's kind of referring to the children, he would not want any of these little ones lost, to wander off and to not be found. And so Jesus is saying, let's move this discussion from sheep to kids. Like if you're a parent and you have 4 kids and one of them's gone, you don't sit around going, well, at least we still have 3. And as the story unfolds, it becomes apparent that Jesus isn't really talking about sheep. He's not even really talking about children. He's just talking about people. He's talking about people that have wandered away from God. And so if we stopped and we summarized what Jesus is saying here, he seems to be saying, and we might conclude something like this. Okay, Jesus, I think I get it. You're saying that if someone I know starts to make choices that lead them directly away from God, they start to go down a road that will lead them directly away from life with God, okay, a life of pain and suffering, that God really cares about that. That he wouldn't want that to happen. And that God will take action to rescue them. That he will go after them. That God is the great shepherd and he will go after every single lost sheep. And I think if we were standing there when Jesus taught this, he'd say, yeah, you're getting it. Like God really cares about people. It actually breaks him when people go wandering off. And so it doesn't matter that he still has 99. He cares about every single one, and so he goes after them. And so far, the whole discussion has been about God going after people. Like the whole illustration to this point is about God's heart. It's about what God does. But then Jesus turns his attention to you and to me and to our response. And the very next thing that he shifts to is this, in verse 15. He says, if your brother or sister sins, go and point out their fault just between the two of you. If they listen to you, you have won them over. So Jesus shifts from what God feels and from what God does and from how God reacts when someone wanders off to how you and I should respond. Jesus says, when somebody sins, okay, when somebody starts to miss the mark with their life, to not go the direction that God would have them go, when somebody wanders off, Jesus says, go and show him his fault. Okay, don't talk about it with other people, which is what we love to do. Did you see that? See what that guy's doing? Don't gossip about it. Go and talk to the other person, Jesus says, just the two of you. And he says, if the person responds, you will have accomplished something huge. Okay, now, in our day and age, we're told that it's wrong to judge people. And when we see someone headed down a road of destruction, sometimes we're pretty content, we're pretty happy to just say, well, who am I to judge? I got my own issues. I'm not perfect, I don't have it all together, I got my own stuff to deal with. So who am I to get involved? And besides all of that judgment stuff, if I were to confront this person, if I were to say something, it might not go that well. They might get mad at me. It might get really awkward. And so if I were to get involved in this, it would get messy for me. So maybe we see someone developing a really unhealthy pattern in their marriage, something that's damaging the marriage and will have dire consequences for the marriage. Maybe it'll lead them to isolation, or maybe it'll increase the likelihood that there would be an affair or something along those lines. And it's obvious stuff. It's just clear as day. But we say, you know what, I'm not going to say anything because who am I to judge? Or we have a friend that's just overly critical of people all the time. They always have to be right. You know anybody like that? Don't raise your hand. And we know that this approach and how they relate to people is killing them relationally. It's costing them friendship after friendship. People don't want to be around them. They can't figure out why because they're always right. Why wouldn't everybody want to be around that? We know that if they don't get this fixed, if they don't turn around and head in a different direction, it's going to lead to all kinds of problems. They're going to be very, very lonely people. But we sit back and we say, well, who am I to judge? And we say nothing. And Jesus says, look, that's actually not the loving thing to do. God cares deeply about people, and when they wander off and they go down a destructive path, he wants them brought back. In fact, he wants you to step up to the plate and to take responsibility for other people. What? Yeah, he wants you to step up to the plate and take responsibility for other people. He wants you to care enough to get involved in somebody else's mess. Okay, now, there is a huge difference, as we all know, between confronting someone in love and judging somebody with this sense of superiority. I just want to recap what we saw last week so we don't start going the wrong direction with this. Here's what Jesus said, and we looked at this last week. Okay, Matthew chapter 7, verses 1 and 2. Jesus says, do not judge, or you too will be judged. For in the same way you judge others, you will be judged, and with the measure you use, it will be measured to you. Okay, now, Jesus is absolutely not saying, as we talked about last week, he is absolutely not saying, so you have to figure out a way to learn to approve of everything everybody does all the time, with everything they do. That is ridiculous, okay? That is absolutely absurd. And there are people in our culture that take it to mean that. No matter what anybody's doing, if you're a true follower of Jesus, you have to learn to accept it. You don't. That's bull. He's not saying, look, you can't ever form a judgment or an opinion about somebody's behavior because people actually do stuff that's wrong. And it's important to be able to say that. Well, if that's the case, though, what's Jesus saying here? think he's very simply saying, look, I want you to apply the golden rule to the way you judge people. Okay, he's saying, judge unto others as you would have them judge unto you. And this is so powerful and this is so important. Jesus is saying, look, I want you to judge other people in the way that you'd want to be judged by them. I want you to take the same approach in judging other people that you would want God to take in judging you. And then he goes on to say this, okay, verses 3-5. He goes on and he says, why do you look at the speck of sawdust in your brother's eye and pay no attention to the plank in your own eye? How can you say to your brother, let me take the speck out of your eye, when all the time there's a plank in your own eye? Jesus is funny, isn't he? He says, you hypocrite, first take the plank out of your own eye, and then you will see clearly to remove the speck from your brother's eye. Okay, so Jesus starts with verse 3. Again, we're recapping what we said last week. He starts verse 3 with a very important question. Why? Like, why do you look at the speck of sawdust in your brother's eye? Why? Like, why do you care about this other person's problem? What's motivating you to care that they have a problem? What's motivating you to even notice? Jesus is saying, okay, let's stop for a second and think about why you even care that this other person has a problem. And Jesus is wanting us to ask ourselves, like, what's going on inside of me that's causing me to be so concerned about this other person's problem? So he says, just stop for a second and ask yourself, why? Why do you look at the itty-bitty little speck in somebody else's eye when you got a big fat plank in your own eye? Okay, in other words, Jesus is saying to me, Jason, how come you are so excited and so motivated to think about everybody else's problems and not your own? I don't know. It's just fun. It's so much more fun to think about what's wrong with everybody else, isn't it? I mean, it's exciting. It's invigorating. It makes me feel great about me. And what Jesus is saying is we need to ask ourselves, now, why is that? Like, why is it so exciting and so invigorating for me to be so critical of everybody else? Like, isn't that in and of itself an indication that I got some major stuff going on that I need to deal with me? So we need to pause and we need to ask, is there more to this than my pure concern for this other person? Is there something else that's going on inside of me? So, like, does this other person's problem actually make you feel good? Is there a pleasure that you get from dwelling on this and thinking about it and thinking about how messed up they are? Does it make you feel superior? Does it make you feel better about yourself? Because we've all been in this situation. When somebody comes to you under the pretense of wanting to help you, like they've just got your best interest in mind, like they're just so humble and so broken for the state of your messed upness. But you realize as they're confronting you, look, they actually don't have my best interest in mind. Actually, they're just judging me and they're just feeling really superior right now. And I'll tell you what, when I feel like that, I don't want to change. Like, even if I know the other person is right in what they're saying, if they do it with the wrong attitude, I don't want to change. Like, I will not change just out of spite to you. I know that what I'm doing is destroying my life, but I don't like that you're telling me about it in such a cocky way. So I'm just going to stay like this and destroy my own life. I'll tell you what, I am so thankful for people that have come to me at certain times in my life, key times, and have confronted me. People that have confronted me in love. Those people have been like absolute gold in my life. The very first time that I can ever remember being confronted, now this probably happened way before this, but the first time I can ever remember having like a sit-down confrontation in my life, like we need to pull up a chair, dude, kind of a confrontation. I was 5, maybe 6 years old. And my mom grabbed me and she said, we need to sit down. And she said, Jason, I think you're an incredible kid. I think you're talented and I think you're smart and I love you. But I've noticed that you tend to brag a lot. You tend to go around telling everybody, everywhere, how great you are. And just so you know, sweetheart, you're right. Okay, you are great. But here's the problem. I think you tell people how great you are because you want them to like you. I think you tell them how great you are because you think it will help them like you. But it won't. They won't like you. They can't like you. It's just human nature to not like arrogant people who are full of themselves. That's just how it works, sweetheart. And so you can choose to do what you want, but they're not going to want to be around you. Okay? You keep bragging like that, you keep doing what you're doing, they're not going to want to be around you. They're going to want to run away from you. And you're going to spend the rest of your life alone. And you will die a very lonely old man, and no one will come to your funeral. She didn't say the last part. But she basically said, dude, let your game do the talking. Now, the truth is, I really needed to hear that. I needed some intervention. And if my mom had not stepped in and confronted me about my bragging problem, I would not be the amazing person that I am today. Okay, now, here's what I've noticed. I've noticed that how people confront me makes a big difference. Have you noticed that? I mean, my mom could have come to me and said, you are arrogant and you're stuck up and people don't like you. You think they like you. They don't like you. They smile at you and they act like they like you because you're a kid and they're supposed to, but they hate you. The thing is, sometimes 5-year-olds don't respond very well to that. And so she was very thoughtful, very wise woman, very positive. And she said, look, I think you're amazing and you could be even more amazing if. I don't know about you, but I actually respond pretty well to that. I'm amazing, and I could be even more amazing if. One of the things that I love about my wife is that she is a masterful confronter. And when we first met, I saw her, and she's so beautiful, and she's so cute, and I just thought she's so cute, and she's so soft-spoken. Just a sweetheart. And after a couple of weeks, I was like, whoa. She's like a lion pretending to be a lamb. And I mean that in the best possible sense. When she is passionate about something and she knows she's right, man, she's fierce about it. And I've learned a ton from just being around her and watching her confront. She confronted me about 15 years ago about something, and I'll never forget it. And now many of you have heard me talk about this before, but this was something that deeply impacted my life. This was huge for me. Not long after we got married, we were taking a walk up in Bellingham, and we lived up there. And I was talking with her about something that I was super passionate about. And I don't even remember what it was, but I remember being all fired up. And Jen stopped me right in the middle of what I was saying, and I was like, wait, I haven't gotten to the good part yet. And she's like, no, stop right there. And she stopped me right in the middle of this deal. And she said, you are so inspirational when you talk with that much passion. I'm all fired up right now. Just listening to you, I'm all fired up. Okay, but after listening to you preach a couple of times, I just want you to know, if you would preach like that, with passion like that, people would listen and God would move and amazing things would happen. And I was like, really? And it deeply impacted the way that I preach. And I came away from that and I was like, oh, she believes in me. And I came away feeling like, oh man, God could really use me. And I was inspired. But if you get down to the core of what she was really saying, it was basically this. After having listened to you preach a couple of times now, I have to tell you, you are really, really flat. Okay, and at times it borders on being mind-numbingly boring. There is no passion in what you're saying, and it's not impacting anyone. And so right now, as a preacher, you suck. And just so you know, and I've been thinking about this a lot, so just so you know, if you don't get better, we're not going to be able to feed our children. Now, see, here's what I've noticed. I don't respond well when I feel like people are looking down on me, when I feel like people are judging me, and when I feel like people are telling me that I suck. I respond a whole lot better when people are like, imagine how good it could be if. And God has blessed me with a wife that does this for me. It's a beautiful thing. She'll say things to me just everyday things. She'll say, you know what, I would feel so loved by you if. You know, the kids would feel so cared for and so connected to you if. You know, I would feel a lot closer to you if. And she doesn't just do that with me. She does it everywhere. And God's used her in huge ways. I mean, the right word at the right time. I've just seen God bless this over and over and over. And over the years, I've learned a ton from watching her. When we still lived in Bellingham, we were leading a small group, a life group for married couples. And we started this group and we told the couples on the very first night, we said, here's the deal. Okay, if this group's going to be worth everybody's time, we all have to be committed. And there are 5 couples in the group, and we need all 5 couples to be committed to being here. And if this is going to work, we need to be willing to open up to each other. We need to be honest with each other about our struggles and our fears and our hopes and our dreams and what's really going on in our lives. Okay, so we're not here just to study. That's important, but it's not just that. We're here to love each other and to pray for each other and to celebrate together and to cry together and to invest in each other. And if we do that, incredible things are possible. Do you feel the passion in how I was presenting that to the group? Whew, unbelievable. But if you don't open up, okay, and you don't show up regularly, this is eventually going to become a waste of everybody's time. And to be honest, if that's how it's going to go, I got other stuff to do. Okay, so all the couples agreed we'd be all in. After a couple of months, we started the group and we're going, and this one couple would call us and they would cancel like almost every single week. It would be the odd week that they would be there. And the wife, it was always the wife, and she would always call us like a half an hour before the group was supposed to start. And every week she'd have some incredible excuse for why they couldn't come. And so one night, about a half an hour before group, our phone rang. And Jen answered, and she said, hi. And the woman's name that would always cancel. And Jen looked at me. And she rolled her eyes and just like, oh, here we go again. And I thought, oh, man. Now, usually when this woman would call, I would answer because Jen was in the midst of getting ready. And I don't know if you've noticed this, but girls, they put more into getting ready. So I would always answer. And I was always so sweet and so polite because, you know, you just love people into the kingdom. That's all. You just love them and love them. And I was always so sympathetic to whatever her excuse was. Oh, that's so awful. I don't know how you're making it through. I don't even know how you have the energy to call. But on this night, she didn't get me. She got the lion. Now, this woman would always, and I mean always, after giving this really long, dramatic excuse for why it wasn't going to work for her and her husband to be there, she would always wrap it up and she would say, but we're really committed. Whatever it was, you know, the kids are sick or we were, you know, something happened at work today and I'm just in emotional distress, but we're so committed to this group. So I hear Jen talking to her and not being quite as sympathetic as I usually was. And then it just kind of hit the fan. And I knew exactly where they were in the conversation because Jen said, you know what? I'm sorry, but you're not committed. Like you call week after week and you cancel and then you say, but we're really committed. But I need to be honest, you're not committed. And then Jen got really soft and she got really sweet. And she said, but I'll tell you what I think. I think you really do want to be committed. And you know what? I want you to be committed. And so I'm willing to do anything I can to help you be committed. So how can I help you? What can I do? How can I make this work for you? And it was pretty quiet on the other end of the line. Like a long pause, and I'm looking at Jen, and she's looking at me, and we're like... And eventually the woman said, oh, man. You're right. The truth is we haven't been committed. We really haven't made this a priority in our lives. But we really do want to. We really do want to. And Jen said, okay, like, how can I help you? And then they talked through a whole bunch of stuff. We were actually late to group that night, but it was an incredible thing that was happening in that moment. And she prayed for this woman, and she prayed for her family, and they got into some deeper issues. And that night, after they got off the phone, she and her husband talked together, and they made a decision. No, we are going to make this a priority. And after that, they really were committed. A few years after we moved down here to start Brookview, Jen and I went up to Bellingham. We ran into them up there. We ran into that woman. And at the end of the conversation that we had, just kind of catching up with her, she said, before we go, I just want to say, I want to thank you so much for starting that group. It's now been 3 years, and that group has kind of been a lifesaver for us. We've been through a lot of hard things, like really hard things in our marriage. Things have been touch and go a little bit. We've had a lot of hard things just kind of happen in general in our life around us over the last few years. And this group has supported us and helped us and walked us through that stuff in a way that's brought healing and has brought life to us. It's been amazing. And we are in a very different place with God now. We're in a very different place with our marriage. We're in a different place in how we raise our kids because there's other people in that group that are raising kids and they know what they're doing and we've learned so much from them. And prior to that group, she said, my husband didn't have any Christian friends. He just was kind of an island. But these guys have become some of his best friends in the world. They're guys that he trusts, and this has been so huge for him. And so she just said, we're in a very different place than we were 3 years ago. And she said, I just want to thank you for starting that group, and I want to thank you for investing in it, and I want to thank you for investing in me and my family. And I want to thank you for stepping out to challenge me that one night. And I thought, wow, what a difference Jen's courage made. Because, what if she said, well, it isn't really any of my business. It's not my place to judge, and I know that they need this group. I know that they need connection with these other people. I know that but, I wouldn't want to say anything. That she might get mad. It might get worse. Wouldn't want to be too judgmental. I think about, if Jen had taken that approach, where would their family be? Where would their marriage be? Where would their walk with God be? It was just such a huge difference. And I want to just, a little shameless aside right now. Chris mentioned that we have life groups that are kicking off again in January. And just want to encourage any of you who you're coming to Brookview regularly and you're not in community with anybody, you're not connected. That's such a huge, huge part of you growing and you connecting with God, you connecting with other people. And so if you're part of this church and you're not in a group, and you could be, there's a way to work your schedule around that to make that work. I just really want to encourage you, mark that on your communication card, drop it in the offering when it goes by later, and we'll get a hold of you and we'll figure out the best group for you to be in and the thing that would be the best situation for you. But I want to warn you up front, it is a high commitment deal. Okay, you don't want to be talking to Jen later, I'm telling you. Now back to what it says, what Jesus is saying about intervention, about confrontation. He says, look, when someone wanders off and goes down a road that's headed for destruction, God really cares about that. And not only does God go after the lost ones, he wants you to go after them. Okay? He wants you to have enough courage to be able to step out and confront people and point them back to the road that leads to life. And then he continues on and he says, sometimes you have to be willing to go to the person more than once. Whoa. Sometimes you have to be willing to go to the person more than once. So you can't just go, oh, I did that once 4 years ago. You can't just say, well, I talked to him about that, but they don't want to change. We had lunch and she just wants to keep doing what she's doing. Jesus says it actually matters too much for you to just sort of give up on the person. You have to keep trying. In fact, if you have to, if it's necessary, if it makes sense, you even need to get other people involved. Now, I'm going to read to you what Jesus says next, but before I do, I want you to know that there's been a lot of disagreement in the church over the years over these next two verses. Massive disagreement. Okay, here's what Jesus says next. This is verses 16 and 17. Let me go back to 15 just for context. It says, if your brother or sister sins, go and point out their fault just between the two of you. If they listen to you, you have won them over. Okay, verse 16 now. But if they will not listen, take one or two others along, so that every matter may be established by the testimony of 2 or 3 witnesses. If they still refuse to listen, tell it to the church. And if they refuse to listen even to the church, treat them as you would a pagan or a tax collector. Now we read that and we go, whoa, wait a minute, Jesus, are you saying that, like, if I have a cousin that comes to church sometimes and he's wrestling with something like alcoholism, that I should confront him? That if he doesn't listen to me, if he says, I can stop anytime I want, I just don't want to. That I might need to eventually get other people involved? Is that what you're saying? And I think Jesus is saying, that's exactly what I'm saying. But then we look at what else is in this passage, or what else is in these verses, and we look and we say, well, okay, Jesus, but if he won't listen to me, and then he won't listen to the other people that are involved, are you saying that I should get up in front of the whole church and tell the entire church about his alcohol problem? Like even people that don't know him at all? And then if he still doesn't respond, that we, like the entire church, should cut all ties with him, should stop having contact with him? Is that really what you're saying? And the crazy thing is, a lot of people have interpreted what Jesus said here in exactly that way. Because we love formulas. We love a process. We want to know exactly what to do from A to B to C. And Jesus seems to give us kind of a little formula here. We're like, oh, that's a formula. I love that. And a lot of churches do exactly what Jesus just described. And to be honest, I got to be dead honest with you, I think this has caused horrible damage over the years. I think that this has been awful, and I think that it is a gross interpretation of what he's talking about. I think it jumps to all kinds of unwarranted conclusions. And I think there are several things that we need to consider in applying Jesus' words here. First, Jesus said, okay, if they still refuse to listen, tell it to the church. And so we need to ask, well, what does that mean? Like, tell the whole church? Or just part of the church? Like, what does he mean when he says, tell it to the church? Well, Jesus doesn't say. That's kind of a big issue, isn't it? So let me ask something else kind of important. At the time that Jesus said this, was there even a church? Correct answer would be no. Okay, the church didn't even start until way after this. When Jesus was teaching this stuff about confrontation, there was no church in the way that we think about churches. There were synagogues with Jewish people meeting in them, and there was a small group of people that followed Jesus that knew each other very intimately, but there were no churches yet. And the little Greek word that gets translated church simply meant gathering. That's it. Gathering. Okay. Didn't originally mean anything official. Didn't mean a particular institution or a particular denomination or a particular organization. It was just like using the word gathering or assembly. He doesn't specify for us in any way what this looks like. And we've drawn an awful lot of conclusions about this. Seems to me that Jesus is talking about a very small group. An intimate group of people that knows the person well and loves the person deeply. So I think it'd be better to understand what Jesus is saying is something like this. If you go by yourself to confront someone that is heading down an obvious path of destruction, okay, these are not little things that you just go and confront every time somebody says something that's mildly off. He says if you go by yourself to confront someone and they're unresponsive, then you include somebody else. And if they still won't listen, you can't give up. You go to that group of people that are familiar with this person, that know the situation, that care about this person. It might be a group of friends. It might be your life group. It could be your extended family. It would be whoever makes sense for that person. And he says, look, I want you to go to the appropriate group, okay, the group of people that knows that person and the situation, that loves them, and you say, look, okay, we need to do something about this. It isn't just all on them, and it isn't just all on me. We need to do something about this. Now let's go to the second part of this deal. Jesus says that if the person still won't respond, okay, we go to them individually, then we go to them with another person, then we get a group of people involved, because this is a big enough deal. We're talking about alcoholism. We're talking about major destructive stuff in somebody's life. Jesus says if this person still won't listen or respond, he says, then you treat him as you would a pagan or a tax collector. What in the world does that mean? Like, what does that look like lived out? Now, historically, tons of people have understood that to mean you completely disassociate with them. Okay, you cut them off relationally from the entire community so that they feel the weight of their sin. Because hopefully, somehow in that, it will lead them to repentance and wanting to come back. But I just have to ask, and I think we need to be extremely thoughtful about this. Is that how Jesus treated pagans and tax collectors? Is it? No. Are we confused about this? Is that how Jesus treated pagans and tax collectors? No. Jesus reached out to people that were far from God like nobody else. And he was criticized brutally for it over and over again. He was called a friend of tax collectors and sinners. They were said, look, this guy, you know what's wrong with your rabbi, to the disciples? He drinks and he eats with tax collectors and with sinners. This morning we're reading the words of Jesus as they're recorded in the book of Matthew. Okay, just so we're all clear about this, who wrote the book of Matthew? Matthew. And before Matthew became a disciple, what did he do for a living? He was a tax collector. So when Jesus invited Matthew, the tax collector, to be his disciple, clearly he was shunning him, right? And then if you remember, the very next thing that Jesus did, he said, hey, Matthew, come follow me. And then let's go over to your house for a party. And who was at the party? All Matthew's tax collector buddies. Again, Jesus clearly, he's going over there so he can sit in the corner and shun them all. There's wine and there's food and there's laughing and talking and discussing going on, and there's tax collectors everywhere. And just to get like a cultural equivalent of this would be like eating nachos and drinking beer with pimps and drug dealers. So do you remember what the Pharisees, because they're outside the party, they're on the outside because they are shunning the tax collectors. They're on the outside of the house and they see what's going on, and they're like to the disciples, they say, hey, how come your leader eats and drinks with tax collectors? It's so funny how the religious people couldn't get it. But now it's the religious community that says, hey, when someone sins, excommunicate them, cut them off completely. I don't know, is it me or is that like ironic? And I think the church has missed the boat big time on this. And I love the way that this passage is translated by Eugene Peterson in the Message. To me, this really gets to the heart of what Jesus is getting at. Okay, so after you confront someone, he says, and this is from the Message. He says, if he won't listen, take one or two others along so that the presence of witnesses will keep things honest, and try again. If he still won't listen, tell the church. If he won't listen to the church, you'll have to start from scratch. Get this. If he won't listen to the church, you'll have to start from scratch, confront him with the need for repentance, and offer again God's forgiving love. Why? Because what they're doing with their life is a really, really big deal, and it's going to lead to pain, and it's going to lead to suffering. It is going to lead to the loss of life, and God doesn't want that. So whose responsibility is it to get involved in that mess? Jesus says, it's mine. It's yours. Why? Because we are the hands and the feet and the mouthpiece of God. There's no other way that this is going to happen. And the whole point here that Jesus is making is, look, you can't write them off. You can't ever give up. So I think what Jesus is saying here is, look, when you see somebody headed down a dark road, don't hide behind the idea that it's not your place to judge. Don't just stand there and do nothing and say nothing. Like, you might not be able to think of the perfect thing to say, but you have got to say something. You might not have maybe you've said something before. You look at the situation and go, well, I've said something before. And they don't seem to be making any changes. Jesus says, even that's not an excuse. Look, you may need to involve other people. You may need other people to go to this person and say, hey, and you may need to grab all those people and say, hey, we all need to do something about this. You may need to confront very boldly, or you might need to offer a little bit more of a gentle challenge. You might need to involve other people. You might not need to involve other people. But whatever you do something. Now here's the deal. Can we just be honest with each other? All of us need some intervention from time to time. We all need it. And it is one of the greatest gifts that you can offer to people that you love if you do it in love, if you do it in a spirit of humility, if you do it in a way that will build them up. And the truth is, we all need people who will love us enough to call us out from time to time. And so maybe you've got somebody, maybe there's a situation in your life right now, it's just obvious. I mean, something is developing in their life. It's a pattern, and it's a pattern of bad behavior. It's a pattern that will lead them to dark places, to a loss of life, the kind of life that God wants to give them. And you can see where it's leading them. Jesus is asking us, will you have enough courage and enough love to step in and do something? Get creative if you need to. You might need to involve other people. You might not. You might do it very gently. You might need to really get their attention. You got to do something. We've got to do something because we love each other. All right, let's pray together. Father, thank you so much. I thank you so much that when we were wandering off, you sent Jesus after us. You sent him to track us down, to show us what love looks like, to show us your heart, to say, why would you run from me? Do you know what you're running from? To call us back to you, to invite us back to you. And God, I pray this morning that you would help us as people who live in America, the most individualistic culture in the history of planet Earth, to think a little bit more collectively about who you've called us to be. That you actually want us to take responsibility for other people. You want us to care about what's going on in the lives of other people enough to step out and take a risk. To step out and grab them and say, hey, I see what's going on and I'm worried for where this is headed. But if you were to do things differently, it could be beautiful. I pray that you would give us wisdom. I pray for those of us right now that have someone in mind. I mean, there may be a situation at work or in our family or with our kids or with our parent, with a friend, coworker. It's just obvious that they need somebody to step in, and we've just been hiding behind this excuse of, well, it's not my place to judge, and Jesus doesn't want me to judge. God, I pray that you would give us courage. I pray that you would give us wisdom. I pray that you would give us enough love to quit hiding behind that excuse. To step out and do what needs to be done in partnership with you. God, teach us to be good confronters, to do it with love, to do it with humility, to do it well. To be that for each other. We need it. We all need it from each other. We love you in Jesus' name. Amen.